Welcome to the Mid-Atlantic Championship Podcast, the podcast that travels back into time to review classic episodes of Jim Crockett Promotions' Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling program as they appear on the WWE Network and the NBC streaming service Peacock. I am Mike Sempervive, joined by my co-host Roman Gomez, and we welcome you to our voyage in reviewing these classic episodes. My co-host Roman Gomez. Roman, how are you?
Doing great, Mike. I'm really looking forward to being able to relive the good old glory days of old school wrestling, and in particular, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling.
It's going to be awesome. We hope it is, at least. And we're going to start off in 1982, and we can talk a little bit about the first edition that we'll review of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling as it appears on the WWE Network. This air date for the show, Saturday, January 2nd, 1982. When it comes to these shows, we are going to give you the air date as it aired in Charlotte and Greensboro, the home territories of Jim Crockett Promotions in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. So I'm sorry, everybody, you're going to have to adjust your childhoods accordingly here, but that's okay. This show was recorded on Wednesday, December 30th, 1981, which was the first TV tapings after the company had closed down for a few weeks for the Hanukkah and Christmas holidays. I don't know how many people out there are familiar with the WWE Network. I bet a lot of you are, and you're not just listening to this blindly. You're going to go follow along with us and watch some of these episodes. But if you're not aware of the WWE Network and you're going to be a newbie who goes out there and checks it out, and I want to say this too, that's one of the points of this program. You're not going to hear us talk a lot about whatever time in space that we're recording this show. We try to keep this as evergreen as possible, just because we want to be an accessory for you, no matter who you are, at no matter what point you decide to check these shows out on the WWE Network. And one of the most jarring things, if you haven't seen a WWE uploaded Mid-Atlantic show, is the theme music. Gone is Don Ray's Got to Have Lovin' that you hear at the beginning of this episode. We love paying tribute to that. That is the original music that was used for the original show. Obviously, there are issues with rights, and that's why most of the music that are on these old wrestling shows, no matter from what territory they are, whether it be for the wrestler's entrance music, whether it be for bumps used during the show, or whether it be for the theme music, WWE, because they don't want to pay out of the nose for all of this stuff, has decided to just overdub the music. In the cases of the wrestlers, like a Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, it's almost painful because guys like that, guys like the Road Warriors, man, you expected to hear their music, and that's what made part of the appeal of these things so great. But unfortunately, we understand why they do that, and they have a gimmicky, kind of like a loungy disco hybrid something or other kind of theme that they decided to put over the episode. And when it came to this episode, it was very, very loud. So what I'm going to do here is play the introduction of the show, hosted by Bob Caudle and David Crockett, but it's going to be joined in progress as soon as the music ended because, yeah, it was loud. So unfortunately, we missed the introductions of Ivan Koloff and some other things that they're talking about, but you'll kind of get the gist of what we're going to be seeing here on this show, Saturday, January 2nd's episode of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling.
About greatness, David. We've been getting here at the end of the year, this past year, we got a lot of comments from all of the fans about who has contributed the most to wrestling during the past year.
That's right, and I have to say right now that you fans are very opinionated.
That's right.
Which, that's all right. We want that because you're the people that make us number one. We're the number one wrestling program in the United States, and we're very proud that you've made us that way because we value your opinion greatly. And because of that, we've decided to do something. People have been talking. They've been mad. So, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? As far as with the wrestlers, now you get to decide something.
Who has contributed?
That's right. You will decide who contributes the most to Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling in the year 1981. Since we're in a new year, I think it's appropriate to do that. And in the upcoming weeks, we're going to tell you people how to write in.
Right,
and
how they can vote.
That's right, and we're going to show you what the wrestler gets. I think it's going to be great.
I do, too.
And right now, I want to thank you, really, for making us number one.
Right, David, and fans, we'll be telling you more about that in the coming weeks. Right now, let's go up to the ring as we're about ready for action.
We've had Wrestlers of the Year, we've had Rookies of the Year, we've had Most Popular Votes of the Year. How do you feel about this one, Roman? Who contributed the most in 1981?
I thought that was a very weird phrase, and that's something immediately when I heard that, who contributed the most, because I don't understand how exactly you quantify that. Is it the guy that won the most belts? The guy that held on to the title the longest? The one that sold out the most arenas? How do you decide who contributed? It's very subjective. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of an unusual choice of words.
Yeah, as we move on throughout the show, I mean, it is going to be something that gets hammered on hard, not only on this show, but for the weeks to come, too. Now, the ironic part is David Crockett talked about at the beginning how we've already had fans writing in. No address was given at any point during the show for anybody to write in, so I guess unless you knew that to write into Briarbrand Drive, or unless David Crockett bumped into you at the gas station or something like that, I'm not exactly sure how they were able to get these votes in. But it was time for our first match at that point, and it was Jay Youngblood and Jake Roberts against Mike Miller and Chris Markoff. And the referee for the match was Stu Schwartz. Both Roberts and Youngblood at this point were young, 27 years old here. They both had debuted in 1975, and one thing you'd notice about Roberts when you watch these shows is how well-rounded he was already at that age. Not only as a presence inside the ring, but also outside the ring on the microphone. With Jay Youngblood, he had already been in the area before. He had the first incarnation of his team with Ricky Steamboat. In September of 1980, he headed back to the Pacific Northwest, where he'd originally got his start, and he'd stay out of the Carolinas until May 21st, 1981, when he'd return to the area, defeating one of the company's new young boys, a guy by the name of Jim Nelson. You get very familiar with him later on down the line. Mike Miller was still on a learning excursion away from the Portland area that he'd end up becoming synonymous with later on in his career. After stops throughout the South, Miller came into the Mid-Atlantic from the Mid-South territory in late June of 1981, just basically becoming an undercard fixture, trading wins and losses with other young guys who were at his level. When it came to Chris Markoff, he was a territorial star for years and probably best known for his AWA exploits, although he did have significant runs in Florida and Los Angeles as well, too, back in the late 60s and the early 70s. At this point in his career, he was basically a mid-card veteran villain. He was in Mid-Atlantic alongside Nikolai Volkov as the Imperial Russians. The team had begun teaming in Florida, and that June 1981 began being managed by Lord Alfred Hayes. Upon coming into the area, they picked up the Mid-Atlantic Tag Team titles from Dewey Robertson and Johnny Weaver. And then in late November, they had lost them to the team of Youngblood and Johnny Weaver, and the trio began to disintegrate. Roberts and Youngblood were preparing for house show matches that week against Carl Fergie and Ox Baker, who were at that time the Mid-Atlantic Tag Team champions, and you notice they don't mention anything about these tag titles as they talk about the match. What you will notice is they talk a lot about the contest they had going on, but zero about the tag team championship. That is because the Mid-Atlantic Tag Team Championship, even back in the day, was really essentially nothing more than a prop. Anytime the NWA World Tag Team Championship was in the area, and with Ole Anderson going back and forth between Georgia and the Carolinas, he always seemed to be in the area. When that happened, that NWA World Tag Team Championship basically took all the precedent out of everything. I believe it was in January of 1981 that finally Roy Shire's Tag Team Championship died and went away. And when that happened, finally, the only NWA World Tag Team Championship that was left was controlled by Ole Anderson and featured mostly Georgia, a little bit in Florida, and definitely the Mid-Atlantic. So this is what we're here to do. We're here to give you some history when it comes to these shows. We're here to give you some context of what was going on at the time and give you a little bit of a wider view of what was taking place. As time goes on, we're going to see how light the tag team situation was in both the WWF and the AWA and how strong the NWA World Tag Team Championship was at that time. But I don't want to talk too much about that and get away from the match that they didn't really talk about a whole lot anyway, as we'll hear with this 1981 Who Contributed the Most vote banter between David Crockett and Bob Caudle.
Fans, yes, sirree. We appreciate all that mail we've been getting, and already the comments that you've had as to who you think has contributed the most to Mid-Atlantic Wrestling during the past year. And as David mentioned earlier, David, I think it's going to be tremendous that we're going to have a contest. We're going to let all of you fans vote. We're going to let you make the choice, and you're going to make the decision.
Whether it's good or bad, I'm talking about, believe it or not, we've had letters, people praising.
I saw one where they said Sergeant Slaughter had contributed the most, David.
Right. So, you know, we've got the best wrestlers in the world right here on the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. Look, you've got the World Tag Team Champions, Ole Anderson, Pacino. You've got Sergeant Slaughter, U.S. Champion. Blackjack Mulligan Jr., he's great. Ricky Steamboat, Jay Youngblood, Jake Roberts, Ray Stevens, Roddy Piper.
The new world champ. He may have had a lot to do with that, too, and I'm sure he's going to get a ton of votes.
Right. We're very proud that Ric Flair is the world heavyweight champion, and he came from Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling.
Well, Roman, as you hear, they continue to talk about the 1981 who contributed the most banter, and a little bit earlier on you mentioned about to quantify something like that. How are you supposed to vote on it? And it was left wide open, and it's going to be a subject that they talk about throughout the show as well, too, including having the heels kind of doing some bantering back and forth with each other as well, too. And when it came to the match itself, Jake Roberts pinned Mike Miller after Jay Youngblood chopped Miller coming off the ropes, and Roberts gave him the Mr. Wrestling 2 coup de grace knee lift. What'd you think of the match, and any thoughts on it?
You can definitely see how much they wanted to talk about that, who contributed the most. You know, as you can tell in that soundbite that you played, the crowd was going crazy, and there was all kinds of noise in the ring, and the announcers were just going to keep harping on this, who contributed the most. And you had alluded to earlier how good Jake Roberts looked at an early age. Jake, you could tell early on, just had it, and that knee lift that he used to finish the match was very impressive, and like you said, very reminiscent of Mr. Wrestling 2.
Another young guy at that point in his career that was certainly making it was Roddy Piper. And he wanted to bust into the studio and talk a little bit about what he was contributing in 1981.
All right, man, wait just a minute. Here is Roddy Piper. Just as we were about to have action in the ring.
Just a second.
Okay.
I got something to say. Me being the Mid-Atlantic heavyweight champion, me having defended time after time and still have it, I have the right to come up here and demand a little time. You're talking about all these people are supposed to be writing in and giving a trophy, which means money, which means all kind of publicity to who contributed the most to wrestling in 1981. Now you're looking and they're saying, oh, how about Ricky Steamboat? How about Bob Slaughter? How about Ivan Koloff? How about Jake the Snake? How about Ric Flair? How about Ric Flair? How come Ric Flair won't give me a fight? I'll tell you something right now. In 1981, I was not only the TV champion. In 1981, I was not only the United States heavyweight champion. In 1981, I was not only the Mid-Atlantic champion, but I was also the most feared wrestler for anyone to fight. You see, now what I'm talking to you is this. You're supposed to write in now and choose the one you think contributed the most to wrestling in 1981. And you say that I got no guts. Now I present something to you. How much guts do you have? Do you have enough guts to be able to swallow your pride and say, Roddy Piper, yes, you are right. There is nobody but nobody that held more titles in 1981. There is nobody but nobody that brought more fear, that won more matches in 1981. Do you have enough guts yourself to, when you write, to be right? Do you have the guts to say, yes, sirree, it is Roddy Piper? You see, I stand up here and you say, oh, yes, but you got such a big mouth. But obviously, I'm perfect in so many other ways.
Roman, the words of Roddy Piper, who answers your question a little bit, at least how he is looking at how you would quantify who gets to be, what was it, contributed the most to Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling in 1981. Hey, the rowdy one, Roddy Piper, it doesn't get any more classic than that, and it shows the embarrassment of riches that Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling had at the time when it came to talent. And that's all we see of Roddy Piper this week, but you can't go by without giving your thoughts on the rowdy one.
Anytime you could hear Hot Rod, it always made the show that much more entertaining. If you think about it, when he said he was the TV, the U.S., and the Mid-Atlantic champion, all in one calendar year. Now, that was a different day and era than what we have today. That's when the belts actually meant something. So for him to hold three of the area's top championships in 1 year,
He was huge. He hit hard when he came over into the Mid-Atlantic territory in October of 1980. There was just no doubt. He was a perfect fit. Flair, Steamboat, you had those guys, those young guys that Piper would fit perfectly with. He was the perfect anti-Wahoo, the perfect anti-Blackjack type of character. He was fantastic. And you had your dastardly heels like your Iron Sheiks, your sadistic ones like your Greg Valentines. But there was really nothing like Roddy Piper. And he won that NWA Mid-Atlantic television title, another legendarily forgotten championship. And by that December, he was already main eventing with Ric Flair and feuding over the United States title. He waged war with every top babyface in the territory throughout 1981, losing the U.S. heavyweight title to Wahoo McDaniel. And last episode, I explained how that story kind of affected where we were inside of the promotion, but we will go from that championship back to the one that we were just speaking about, the Mid-Atlantic television champion. Ivan Koloff was out to face Ron Sexton. Referee was Tommy Young, and I'm going to play the introduction here and let Cottle and Crockett explain how the NWA television championship worked. I was always a big fan of that belt. Names like Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard that held on to that belt. Even a little bit earlier on than that, going to the Baltimore Civic Center to see Georgia Championship Wrestling, where Ronnie Garvin and Jake Roberts had feuded over that television title as well, their version of it. Always was a big fan of that belt, and it had a very unique booking twist to it that you could always pull out and get some mileage out of at any time. And I'm going to let Cottle and Crockett explain that, and then we're going to bring it back.
Ivan Koloff, Ron Sexton. Remember, for the first 15 minutes of any match, the TV title is at stake. The NWA Television Championship is at stake.
Ron Sexton right there with a beautiful flying head scissors. David, you're right, and had not Roddy Piper got into the studio and entered the studio just when he did, Ivan Koloff had this NWA TV belt up there, and I was just about to say, fans, you're looking at the NWA TV champ when in shoots Roddy Piper. But you are, and Ivan Koloff, man, as David says, the first 15 minutes of any match, and this is a 10-minute match, so if Ron Sexton can beat him, David, he's going to have the NWA TV belt.
Correct.
A Russian Bear, though, when you defeat Ivan Koloff, you have done more than a day's work.
And there you hear Bob Cottle and David Crockett explain the little bit of a gimmick that the television championship would always have. For the first portion of the champions match, no matter where it was, for the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, no matter what it was at the time, the limit they decided to have it, that was always the time where the championship could be on the line. And Roman, I always liked that gimmick. I was a fan of the TV title. Obviously, as time moved on, it became kind of an outdated concept, and now we're probably at a time where it's better off to have somebody holding a social media championship or something like that, a streaming video championship instead of a TV championship. But, hey, we're old men. We like that TV title, right?
I always liked that stipulation. You could have a heel champion go to a 10-minute draw with the babyface on TV, and then they could plug it. Well, if you go out to the arena where there's a 15-minute time limit, and it would be a way to get the fans to go to the arena. Or you could have the babyface pin the heel at the 17-minute mark, but not win the belt because it wasn't done within the first 15 minutes. And you could set up a rematch doing that way. There was always a couple different ways you could go with the TV title, and I kind of like that aspect of it. It was different than just a traditional title that can be won or lost at any time in the match. It had to be within that first 15 minutes.
Kid, one that would always drive you nuts. Somebody would have somebody in a sleeper hold or whatever the maneuver would be, and you end up passing out. But because they passed out and the bell rang and then the arm came down, it's too late. And man, if he only had 5 more minutes, and that was always a cool thing. And Tully Blanchard, I really think almost out of anybody, I always thought he did that for Crockett Promotions the best. But we're fast forward in a couple of years there. For right now, Ivan Koloff's got that championship, and you talked about an embarrassment of riches with talent. My God, Ivan Koloff, what a superstar he was. Looked like a zillion bucks even at his age there, and he would continue to go on for a long time. And the fact he continued on for a long time, I think, has been something that hurt him for a long time. in the Wrestling Observer newsletter Hall of Fame voting that would take place because it took way too long for that guy to get in there. I mean, everybody already, of course, knows his Bruno Sammartino, the defeat that he gave Bruno at Madison Square Garden, where he was quickly ushered out of the building and then really the territory as he dropped the title to Pedro Morales. But being the guy to stop Bruno Sammartino's record-length title reign was an unbelievable accomplishment, and one that he was able to hold on to the rest of his life, but it wasn't something that he just rested on his laurels with. He continued to go on, and he was a star everywhere he went. After he left the WWF, he went to Vancouver and to the AWA, where he just became an even bigger star. He was a big guy in St. Louis, even main eventing against Bruno there as well, too, and he did that until January 1974, when he entered the Carolinas for the very first time, and he feuded with Paul Jones over the NWA Mid-Atlantic TV title. He also feuded with Wahoo McDaniel and Tiger Conway Jr., who was Jones's tag team partner. And Koloff would stay there a year. He would leave in 1975 when Eddie Einhorn began the IWA and ran their first card in Savannah, Georgia. And their plan was to run up and down the East Coast and basically have a whole national championship promotion going on. And unfortunately, it didn't last too long, but Koloff's power was one where he was looked upon as one of the biggest stars and was going to be very important if the promotion was ever going to make it in New York, alongside guys like Ernie Ladd and Mil Mascaras and Thunderbolt Patterson. When that IWA's original incarnation ended up sputtering out, Koloff left to go back to New York, where he worked almost exclusively sans tours of New Japan Pro Wrestling until the beginning of 1977. It was during that time that Koloff, along with his friends Ernie Ladd and superstar Billy Graham, basically formed a pseudo-union in dealings with Worldwide Wrestling Federation boss Vince McMahon Sr. The trio demanded main event money no matter where their position was on the card, and due to their star power, they got it. Koloff would work for McMahon constantly, except for at one point in June of 1976, kind of a little blip in Ivan Koloff's career that not a whole lot of people know about. It was at that time where Koloff, Ladd, Graham, along with California legend John Tolos, tried to run opposition to NWA Hollywood promoter Gene LaBelle in the triangle between Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. Koloff was billed as the United Wrestling Alliance champion, and there seemed to be at least one TV taping, but the effort reportedly ended up being thwarted after it was tied up in court by LaBelle. In addition to working with the WWF, Koloff would work for an extended time in Florida, which led to several famous runs in Georgia between 1978 and 1980. Koloff would then head back to Florida for the last half of 1980 until November, when he would go back to Jim Crockett Promotions for the first time since he ran opposition against them in 1975. And Roman, Ivan Koloff is a legendary figure, and if I'm not mistaken, through going to the Cauliflower Alley Club, you actually had some chances to meet with him, correct?
Yes, I finally got to meet Ivan Koloff, and I will always have a soft spot for him because he is one of the reasons I became a wrestling fan. When I first got cable, he was on Georgia Championship Wrestling, and he was one of the reasons why I became a fan. And a couple of years ago at Cauliflower Alley, I finally met him, and he was so nice, such a nice gentleman, and he did a promo on me as the Russian Bear. And you talk about a mark-out moment. For him to say my name in his Russian accent and that he was going to kick my butt and take the title, and, and he cut this promo on me, is something that is one of the most treasured things I have in my wrestling collection. And in an era when people discuss legends and it's kind of loosely thrown around, he was a legend. Like you said, he just didn't end Bruno's reign. It didn't stop there. Like you said, everywhere he went, he was a main event caliber wrestler. In Florida, I remember him teaming with Mr. Saito. And one word about Ivan from several people is a machine. He could just go and go and go, and it seemed like he never got tired. He was a true credit to the wrestling business.
And find somebody to say something bad about Ivan Koloff. You can't do it. You can't do it. He did about himself, and boy, was it a revelation to find out how drugged up and drunk he would get. But unlike many wrestlers, especially from that time, there are no stories of craziness. There were no stories of unprofessionalism. There are no stories of bad nights, and surely he may have had some, but it's a testament to him and his professionalism that he was able to,
Yes.
while his demons were eating him up, they're so easily, I mean, you have people's lives in your hands out there, but he seemed to always make sure everyone was taken care of. And when it came time to the performance for the fans and delivering for what the company wanted and what the fans expected, Ivan Koloff absolutely always did that. And Koloff pinned Sexton in this match after a driving knee smash from the top rope. He did give Sexton a little bit earlier on. The announcers did note that Sexton did challenge Koloff for this match and wanted to test himself. And Koloff did give Sexton some good stuff early. He came back and started to roll on him and made it clear that even though he had a little bit of a slip-up at the beginning, he was the much better man, to the point where Tommy Young was wondering why Koloff wasn't putting him away, but he finally did with that driving knee smash from the top rope. During the match, NWA official and troubleshooting referee Sandy Scott came out to join Bob and David on commentary to talk about, no surprise, the 1981 fans poll, and how everybody, at least in the Rule Breakers locker room, believed it could be them, which led to this little exchange.
There's another name, Koloff.
That's right.
He feels that he's number one. So it's going to be very interesting, and it's going to develop a few situations, and maybe the sergeant and Ole or go on.
Hey, you know what could happen? We could get these guys all at each other. They could be at each other's throats, and I think that'd be beautiful.
It could happen.
That could happen.
Roman always loves stuff like that. And one, because obviously it's a little homespun banter, treating it like it's a real thing, guys talking about other guys and getting amped up back there. But also because it gave the rule-breaking manager, or it gave the rule breaker, a chance to go, see, there you guys are conspiring. You're trying to turn us all against each other. Yeah, well, make you happy. Wouldn't that make you happy, Coddle? Would that make you happy? I always love that type of stuff. And, it's one of those things now that's obviously missing, I think, from pro wrestling today. But, that type of banter I always thought was great.
Yeah, it was funny to hear them. I don't know. It's not something we could picture them in the locker room talking about. Oh, I contributed the most. No, I contributed the most. But they were hammering that contest, and it's just kind of funny to hear them talk about that.
Now, one of my favorite parts of territorial wrestling used to be the localized promos. Man, I love the localized promos. And in fact, I actually developed my own version of shorthand by watching WTBS and World Championship Wrestling, and every time that bell would ding and dynamics would start to play, and Tony Schiavone or Freddie Miller or whoever it was at the time started to run down all of the events that would be coming all over the country, I would be scribbling them down, trying to figure out where you could get tickets and all that sort of stuff. I absolutely loved it. Not only for the geography portion, of course, but also because of the promos. And one of the weird things that happens on these shows is, and it's really, really odd, and I don't understand why they do it, but in the uploading of these Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling shows onto the WWE Network, they will put, for whatever reason, promos that don't fit into the time space that we are talking about and the show that is on. This is going to be a great example here. This one is from the studio of Les Thatcher's Knoxville promotion, which was owned by Jim Crockett, Blackjack Mulligan, and NWA champion Ric Flair. And in the last episode, we kind of talked about where that territory was at and how it was fitting into the whole landscape. With Big Bill Ward being there on the call, he runs down a handful of shows that are coming to deep southeastern Virginia and across the border in Bluefield that is happening, quote, tonight. That is actually March 6th, 2 months away. I'm serious. Here it is.
A big program of wrestling at George Wythe High School Gym in Wytheville, Virginia on Tuesday, March 16th. Lord Alfred Hayes, Ivan Koloff, Terry Taylor, Johnny Weaver, Jimmy the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant. A great program at Christiansburg High School Gym on Tuesday, March 9th. Ninja, Ivan Koloff, Jake Roberts, Terry Taylor, and Jimmy Boogie Woogie Man Valiant. An action-packed program at the Roanoke Civic Center tomorrow at 3 p.m. for Stan Henson, Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff, Sergeant Slaughter, Terry Taylor, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, Tommy Rich, and Dusty Rhodes. A super program at the Brushfork Armory in Bluefield tonight, 8:15 p.m., with the lumberjack match, Johnny Weaver versus Lord Alfred Hayes. We also have Ivan Koloff versus Jimmy the Boogeyman Valiant for the TV title. The Super D will take on Jay Youngblood. If the Super D loses, he will unmask. If Youngblood loses, he will leave town. We have a special interview with Super D.
Super Destroyer tonight, Bluefield, it's you and Jay Youngblood. He must defeat you or unmask you or leave town.
That's right. Bluefield's the place. Jay Youngblood and I went out and spent a little money, young ladies, and I want to tell this right now. Jay Youngblood is on his way out. I have a ticket right here out of Bluefield. Anywhere in the world he wants to go. He's on his way out. No man can take this mask off, much less a little Indian. So all you ladies be ready to stay with me that night, because Youngblood is on his way out.
Tonight in Bluefield.
And also a lumberjack match, Johnny Weaver against Lord Alfred Hayes.
Before we talk about that, let me say that Super Destroyer wouldn't like you calling him Super D. And Ellen Weaver, for a long time you've been boasting and bragging how you've been chasing me around the countryside. Well, tonight, my dear fellow, you meet your comeuppance. And don't think because you'll have a few friends scattered around the outside that you'll be able to command an issue. Because I will also have lumberjacks there, and they will be my friends. Oh, yes, I have friends. And I'm going to pitch you out to them.
For the TV title, Ivan Koloff against Jimmy the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant.
I've been accused of breaking rules, sticking my fingers in eyes, pulling hair, running my opponent at the post. Well, of course, the people know that this is not true. But this Valiant gets away with breaking the rules. The referee turns his back. I know you want my title. You're going to have to fight me for it.
Well, Roman, one thing we've definitely learned, do not call the Super Destroyer Super D. And for those people who went, Super D, boy, I've been a Mid-Atlantic fan for a long time. That voice sounds kind of familiar. I'll give you a little hint on what happens. This is a hell of a spoiler. This is more than just 2 months. It's Don Kernoodle in a really, 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 really rinky-dink looking mask and cape that he had on. And it was probably, in fact, it really was just a feud kind of over in that area. That's something you could do at that time when it came to house shows. You can have little things take place in different places. And a little bit later on, we're going to hear the baby faces response to those gentlemen. But Roman, again, why they have decided to randomly put interviews in from out of the time range, I don't know, but they've decided to do that, I guess, to try to give you around 45, 48 minutes of programming, I guess. I really can't understand it, but as somebody that collected the VHS tapes and as somebody that's just a general fan of history, does stuff like that bother you when the WWE Network does it? Do you just kind of shake it off and go, it's no big deal? Or is it something that, like, doing things like that, no matter who it is it something that kind of offends you as a historian, as a classic wrestling fan?
Well, I'm in favor of continuity, but it's just so weird that they would do something not 1, but 2 months down the road. And if you think back, it wasn't till later on in the 80s when they would have pay-per-views, and then, you could hype something up, hey, 3 months down the road, so-and-so is going to be wrestling at the Bash. But to do a house show and have promos for something 2 months down the road, I thought it was just very unusual, why they would just throw that in there. And maybe it was just to kill a little more time. But to me, it was just kind of bizarre to do that.
It's nice that WWE has those things that they have at their disposal and put them up there. I mean, hell, I can watch if you gave me 12 hours on the WWE Network of just nothing but those types of promos, I'd be sitting there salivating for them. I love them, but to drop them into episodes where they are not needed just to do it, and it is a common theme as we go through these shows. It's going to happen very, very often in these early shows, and I believe it's one from, I think we talked about it on the Prelude show from like November of 1981. There's a show that's up on the WWE Network where they're talking about, I think something on like March 24th or in April, it's something like that of 1982, and it's just completely ridiculous. And it's kind of even more ridiculous when you think of the fact that this episode aired on Saturday, January 2nd. And there was a show in Roanoke the next day on Sunday, January 3rd. And there was another show in Greensboro the evening. Ric Flair defeated Ole Anderson in Roanoke. That was the main event. Sergeant Slaughter defeated Blackjack Mulligan Jr. Jake Roberts and Jay Youngblood defeated Ox Baker and Carl Fergie, but unfortunately did not win the Mid-Atlantic Tag Team Championship. Don Kernoodle, the aforementioned Super D, was not a Super D at the time. He was just Don, and he was beaten by Billy Robinson, who came through the area doing a little bit of a tour before he would float back out again. And Lord Alfred Hayes defeated Keith Larson, also on that show. Later on that night, we went to Greensboro at the Coliseum for the weekly Sunday show. That show saw NWA champion Ric Flair defeat Big John Studd in a no DQ match. Blackjack Mulligan Sr., a double disqualification against Sergeant Slaughter in a match with 2 referees. Roddy Piper defeated Ricky Steamboat, and Ray the Crippler Stevens defeated Ole Anderson in a Texas street fight match. And Roman, that brings us to our next match. Ray the Crippler Stevens against Tony Russo with referee Stu Schwartz. And man, I'm not even going to go through all the accolades that Ray Stevens had, but he was on in the last few years before 1982 began, a legendary run throughout the Carolinas. The last time Stevens was in the Mid-Atlantic Territory, he had returned there in November of 1979 to feud with Jim Brunzell over the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship. And in February of 1980, Stevens would transition into becoming the territory's foremost tag team specialist, which was a position quite familiar to him. He would team up with Greg Valentine and Jimmy Snuka in a legendary year-long feud for the NWA World Tag Team titles against Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood. After the run of Snuka and Stevens ended at the hands of Paul Jones and the Masked Superstar on Thanksgiving of 1980, the Crippler got back on the horse by regaining those titles with yet another partner on February 22nd, 1981. That guy was Ivan Koloff, who we talked about a little bit earlier on. Now, that team didn't last all that long, and sooner, Ray Stevens would go ahead and depart back to the AWA for a few months. He'd go to Georgia for a little bit and then return to the Carolinas in November of 1981. Stevens got a couple of world title matches against Ric Flair, but the point of him being there was really to be involved in the story of Ole Anderson and the NWA World Tag Team Championship. On the December 5th edition of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, which is also available up on the WWE Network, Anderson chose Stevens as his new partner after being ordered to find one by NWA official Sandy Scott. Scott was becoming quite perturbed that Ole had yet to defend the titles after Gene Anderson had been out injured. The makeshift duo of Paul Jones and Buddy Landel wrestled Stevens and Ole that night, but Ole and Stevens clashed during the bout, and Ole and Gene left Stevens to fend for himself. Stevens ended up getting the win over Buddy Landel, and after the match, an irate Stevens grabbed Gene's title belt and refused to give it back, and that's where we find ourselves on today's program, as he still carries around the belt that he snatched into the match with Tony Russo, and man, he put the dog on Russo. There was a little bit of selling from Ray Stevens, which is always fun to see because Ray Stevens sold, but then it was business time, and when it was time for business, Ray Stevens got it done. He dispatched Russo as a pile driver and a couple of knee smashes to the chest. After the match, Stevens pushed himself off the mat and drove another knee into Russo before getting up to have his hand raised. He then went out there with Jake Roberts and cut a promo about his feud with Ole Anderson, and with Blackjack Mulligan Jr. also joining them. He talked a little bit about Sergeant Slaughter, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, Roman, about Ray the Crippler Stevens. You lived out there in Vegas. You had a chance to go to AWA television tapings out there at the Showboat. Ray the Crippler Stevens. Ray Stevens and Ric Flair actually taught me how to save money, which is why I'm in the position I'm in right now. But, you know, fast living will do that to you. And boy, he left a trail that many in pro wrestling wish they could emulate. Maybe not outside the ring, but certainly with the work inside the ring. Just an absolute master technician and so great at everything. You got any thoughts about Ray the Crippler Stevens?
Oh, yeah, Stevens was great. As far as his tag team, I mean, he was in a great tag team with Pat Patterson, great tag team with Nick Bockwinkel, and I was able to see them in '86 at the AWA, the Showboat, and Stevens, it was like there was nothing he couldn't do. If you look at him, he was not physically imposing. He wasn't covered from head to toe in muscles or anything like that, but my gosh, that guy could work. And people talk about Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig as a bump taker or whatever. I mean, Ray Stevens did stuff with the flips over the top rope, and some of the bumps he took it was incredible to see the athleticism from somebody that physically did not look like an athlete, but when he got in the ring, man, could he go.
He began his career in 1950. He was 15 years old. So by this point, we are going on 32 years in the business. It is insane to think about. And at 47 years old, still with the incredible bumps, unbelievable work. One of those things, one of the reasons that the WWE Network is so great, they own the rights to all of this footage that they have. And when they put out stuff like this, as much as they can put out, oh man, if you're a wrestling fan, you gotta love going back and being able to see stuff like this. It's just absolutely unbelievable. And that leads into Blackjack Mulligan Jr. against Bill White. Not much to say about this one. Referee was Tommy Young. Blackjack Mulligan Jr., far better known as Barry Windham, defeated White with a bulldog. And at that point, we were on to our next set of out-of-place promos from Bluefield, West Virginia. And on this one, we get the babyfaces' responses. And I left all the other hullabaloo out. It's just going to be the promos and what's coming up in Bluefield 2 months from now. And also notice that we talked about the stipulation earlier on between Jay Youngblood and Don Cronoodle. I don't know if he did this himself or not, but Jay Youngblood decided to up the stakes.
A super program at the Brushwalk Armory, Bluefield. Tonight at 8:15 p.m., lumberjack match, Johnny Weaver against Lord Alfred Hayes.
Well, Hayes, we went back and forth and round with words on television here for a long time. But now, you got to stand up and act like a man. Get in the ring and wrestle. Wrestle against me. Now, you said that you chased me everywhere. Well, if that's true, you finally caught me. You've got me here in Bluefield. But gone is your Russians and gone is the belts. Also gone is your route of escape, because anytime you get out of the ring, there's going to be 8 or 10 guys out there to throw you right back to me. And that's all I need to give you the beating of your life.
Also, on the same program, the Super D #1 meets Jay Youngblood. And Jay, if the Super D loses, he will unmask. If you lose, you will leave town.
I'll tell you what, that's pretty high stakes for anybody to put up. Super D putting his mask up against me leaving town if I lose. Well, Super Destroyer, let me tell you something. Sure, you got a reputation, my friend, around here of beating everybody, crippling them, and running them out of town. But I've come to this area and I've stayed here for a long time. I'm coming here for one reason, and that's to beat you. Then I'm going to take that mask off. And I'll tell you what, Destroyer, you beat me, I'll even cut my hair and leave town.
Well, Roman, there you hear Jay Youngblood deciding to up the stakes a little bit. I'm not sure if he did that on his own, or maybe they wanted to sell a couple extra seats to the match, and maybe they figured that could do it as well, too. But, man, decided to add on the fact that he was going to put his hair on the line as well, too. So there you go.
He must have had a lot of confidence in his abilities, I guess, to just throw on a stipulation like that, put his hair on the line, at the last minute. But like you said, maybe it was just a ploy to sell a few more tickets at the last minute.
When it comes to Jay Youngblood and promos, sometimes you never know. Jay Youngblood was incredibly talented, just a wonderfully sweet human being from what everybody says, an obviously charismatic figure that fans just adored and loved. Unfortunately, his issues with substances and such had been well known, and there would be times with the not being a natural on the microphone anyway, where some of those rambling promos got to the point of being incoherent at times, especially much later on down the line when he was in a tough position. But man, his stardom was unsurpassed in Mid-Atlantic, the same way that Ricky Steamboat came in there and exploded. Awesome territorial babyface, and he and Ricky Steamboat were one of the ultimate territorial tag teams. I'd argue, because of course I grew up with them and loved them so much, I would say they're one of the greatest tag teams of all time. Maybe even, dare I say, the greatest babyface tag team of all time. I know Rock and Roll Express fans would probably disagree with that, and there's many others that have come along the line. They got the chance to do it on a national scale that maybe people would put over them, but I have a feeling for those of you who had a chance to grow up in that time that Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood were just as good as any others out there. And one of the reasons why would be the incredible feud that they would have with Sergeant Slaughter and with Don Cronoodle. And At this point, we are seeing the beginning of the Cobra Corps. Just a few months earlier on, Sergeant Slaughter and Private Jim Nelson began their association on television. It was Halloween, 1981, when Slaughter decided to use Nelson to run interference for him. And he's got a match with Nelson today against Terry Taylor and Mike Davis. And Roman, what did you think about this match? One thing that I took out of it early on was Taylor and Davis working Nelson's arm with David Crockett doing a great job in explaining that the way you wanted to try to take out the Cobra Clutch was basically make sure that those guys were not going to be able to apply it on you. So they went to work on Nelson's left arm and really tried to do damage with that. But the other thing that I also took out of it, which was nice, was Mike Davis and Terry Taylor at that early point in their careers. You could tell, you see a lot of guys early on. We see Mike Miller and you see a lot of people, but you could see where there was, you could see a little bit of flash in Mike Davis, and you could understand what Eddie Graham and what the guys in Florida thought of him and why they were sending him out there and around. But Terry Taylor as well, too, was, I thought, excellent. You could see it even at that point, what kind of the gleam that he had of the possibility of becoming a big, big star.
Yeah, it really is a shame that Taylor got labeled with the Red Rooster, and forever that's what people are going to know him for. But long before that, he was a very, very, very popular, talented babyface he had great matches with Ric Flair, where he took Flair to the limit. And to go back in time and look at this match, I think it's kind of fun to see Taylor before he was a joke or a laughing stock, later on as the Rooster, and to see Slaughter and Nelson team. To me, I got kind of a kick out of that because Nelson would later go on to be Boris Zukov. And many times I would see Slaughter wrestle Boris Zukov for the Americas title in the AWA. So to kind of see the early origins of them together, it was a kick for me because I had seen them against each other so many times.
It's such a crazy tie-in, too. I mentioned earlier on, Jay Youngblood comes back in the territory against Jim Nelson, who's just basically kind of starting out at that point. And all of these stories that will interweave as we go on, as we tell these stories that take place, and Don Kernoodle getting involved in the mix very, very soon here as we go forward, and how that all goes, and ultimately how it takes us into not only that feud, but into the feud of Steamboat and Youngblood against the Briscoes, which would continue this amazing 2-year run that they would go on through 1982 and into 1983 through Starrcade, where they would face off against the Briscoes. So we're just getting started on all of that stuff, and man, am I happy you guys are all here with us too. Boy, I've probably lost the ability to speak a couple times here during the show, but then it was time for the show closing interviews, and that was a good television main event. I'm not sure exactly how long it went. I should probably keep time on these things, and maybe I'll do that for the next show so we can actually tell you exactly how long they went. But a nice back and forth earlier on with Slaughter ultimately getting the Duke over Davis with the Cobra Clutch. And after that, it was time for the show closing interviews. Bob interviewed television champion Ivan Koloff, who bragged that he'd be holding onto the belt for a very, very long time. And then the Andersons joined in, and Gene cut a promo on the Ninja and Ray Stevens stealing one of the belts before he quickly kicked it over to Ole, who also threatened Stevens. But I can't do Gene and Ole Anderson being threatening any justice at all. You need to have Ole and Gene being threatening to do it for you.
The World Tag Team Champions.
Bob, I got Ninja around here, and he's going to show you people a heck of a lot about wrestling. And there's another thing, Ole. We got those championships that Stevens has one of our belts, and we're going to take it away from him one way or another.
That must really grate on you, Ole. It
Well,
must
a little
hurt
bit.
you
I
inside.
look at Sandy Scott out here. He's a representative of the National Wrestling Alliance. You got David Crockett over here, yourself, all these authority figures. If it was up to me and Gene, all we'd do is thrash that Mr. Stevens within an inch of his life and take that belt away from him. Every time I go to do something right away, I got somebody over here who says, oh, no, you can't do it. I got Sandy Scott threatening me with fines and suspensions. Well, you can stop me here, maybe, because you've got the power, but when it gets in the ring, nobody can stop the Anderson brothers. And I'm telling you, Stevens, that if that belt isn't forthcoming pretty soon, if you don't finally wise up somewhere along the line and bring that belt out here on your own, I'm going to take it from you. I'm going to take it. And when I do, you won't like the way I take it. I have to put up with all this garbage from everybody else. In 1981, you're talking about who contributed the most. No question that we did. But 1982 is going to be our year. It's going to be the Anderson brothers' year. You can make book on that.
There was Ole and Gene Anderson talking about Ray Stevens and what they're going to do to him by the time they get their hands on him. And Roman, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to speak to Ole Anderson. I had the great pleasure of doing a podcast for a little while with some good people, Rich Tate, who used to run the GeorgiaWrestlingHistory.com website, Les Thatcher and Mike Mooneyham, and I had the opportunity with them to speak to Ole Anderson one time, and there's only been 2 times where I've really been intimidated by a voice and fearful, like a little kid, that the gravel through the phone would come and take out my throat, and that was with Ole. And that was with Jody Hamilton, who was a sweetheart and the nicest guy in the whole wide world when we had him on the phone. But boy, I was still so intimidated to speak to him, and I was so nervous that Ole was going to call me out my name and all sorts of FUs and S-heads and all that sort of thing. But with Les Thatcher being right there, he decided to take it all out on Les. Poor Les ended up getting the brunt of it. But out there in Vegas or anything, have you ever had a chance to see Ole Anderson? And what were your thoughts on Ole and Gene Anderson and the legendary Anderson family?
I've never met Ole, but I can say that one thing I've always enjoyed listening to Ole on the mic. I remember him as an announcer in Georgia Championship Wrestling, the promos he would cut, the intensity, the believability he would bring to his promos. You know, if you think about it, in this day and age, you know, they define wrestling as entertainment. Ole got stabbed by fans. That's how much they disliked him. That's how good he was at what he did when he got on the mic. And I remember several times him cutting promos where he had a T-shirt on that said "evil, mean, and nasty." And somehow that just seemed appropriate on Ole Anderson.
You may not be able to believe that pro wrestling is real, but you absolutely knew that Ole Anderson was real. And for as much as everyone talks about his booking later on in his life and in his career, at the time that Georgia Championship Wrestling was blowing up and at the time that WTBS was beginning to air all throughout the country, Georgia was an absolute machine. And when you consider that, along with his team with Gene, Gene's team with Lars, Ole's team with Arn, it's just an absolutely unbelievable record of a certainly fabulous and wonderful wrestling family. Roman, I would be remiss if I didn't actually mention this little bit of wrestling history that was also taking place that week. And it's going to be very notable because it's going to affect a lot of what we talk about throughout 1982, into 1983, and most certainly into 1984. On January 1st, 1982, at the Checker Dome in St. Louis, Missouri, in front of 19,821 people, legendary St. Louis promoter Sam Mushnick promoted his last show. It was at that point the St. Louis Wrestling Club was taken over by Pat O'Connor, Bob Geigel, Vern Gagne, and Harley Race. And they would become the ones who would take control of the KPLR Channel 11 Wrestling at the Chase show on Sunday mornings. Larry Matisick, he would be one of the matchmakers, one of the decision makers, and of course the announcer. And it was on that show, as it relates to some things in Mid-Atlantic, where Greg Valentine ventured over and teamed up with Harley Race and went to a double disqualification against David Von Erich and Rufus R. Jones. Also on the show, Dick the Bruiser defeated Ken Patera to win the NWA Missouri Championship, something that would be done to hotshot a way to get Dick the Bruiser one more championship match against Ric Flair that long down the line we're going to go ahead and talk about probably as it relates to Ric Flair in 1982, because it was quite the legendary short run for the Bruiser, and a lot of people believing in St. Louis that maybe, just maybe, the old man could pull it out one more time and had some great matches and some great sellouts with Flair there. And in the main event, Ric Flair defeated Dusty Rhodes in 3 falls to hold on to the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. So I had to mention that because for as much as we're going to be talking about the greatness of this territory, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, and giving our love to the territorial system, it's really at this point that everything begins to disintegrate for the NWA and things start to fall apart for them. So that's where we're at there. I'll also note, too, there was the 74-minute epic in Miami that was taking place around that time as well, too. The Miami Dolphins and the San Diego Chargers. I don't know why I wanted to mention that. I guess I wanted to do that and also mention the fact that in Georgia Championship Wrestling that week, Paul Jones wrestled alongside Outlaw Ron Bass. They were both on the show. And they defeated some guy by the name of, I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy or not, Roman, Jim Virtuoso. You ever heard of Jim Virtuoso?
Oh yeah. I know Jim Virtuoso, yes. Do you want to tell the people out there who he later on became to be, or should we keep that a secret?
They probably already know if they're listening to this show. It was Arn Anderson with a lot more hair and just starting out with a very, very Italian name there, old Marty Lundy did. I don't know how he decided to take something with a vowel at the end there, but yeah. How much of a kick did you get out of that when you realized, and I think like a lot of people do when they see these old tapes, sometimes you see somebody under a different name with a completely different look, and then it's like, it strikes you, it's like, hey, aren't you? and in that case, it was Arn Anderson.
Yeah, it was great. I know on one of the matches in Georgia, Gordon Soley alluded to him being from Rome, Georgia. And, when you look and he threw the left jab, and I'm like, does kind of look like Arn Anderson. And I was able to meet Arn this past May at StarCast, and I gave him a bunch of his matches. And when I mentioned the Vendoroso, he said that one of the ones on TV was like his second ever match. So, he was tickled to be able to get that. And yeah, it's a kick to see some of these guys in their earlier personas and everything. And seeing Arn early on, it was fun to watch.
Yeah, I don't think it was too long for there, too, and then he would be out to Mid-South where he would be Marty Lundy to gain a lot more experience before making a couple stops back into Georgia, but really kind of earning his bones in Southeastern Championship Wrestling, and man, did he have an awesome, awesome tag team with Mr. Olympia, Jerry Stubbs, who is one of the great underrated wrestlers of all time. And certainly in my personal Hall of Fame, both of those guys, they may never get in the Observer Hall of Fame or anything like that, but they're damn sure in my Hall of Fame. But we've reached the end of the first show of 1982 of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling as it appears on the WWE Network. And the next show we do will cover 1982's second show, of course, the January 9th edition. And on this edition of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, Buddy Landell and Tony Anthony take to the ring to battle the formidable duo of Ivan Koloff and Ole Anderson in a tag team main event. Plus, Terry Taylor competes in singles action, Pretty Boy Carl Fergie addresses his relationship with Ox Baker, and much, much more. Yeah, really an entertaining little promo with Carl Fergie and Ox Baker there. But there's the preview that WWE has out there. Hopefully everybody out there enjoyed this. I know I was at a loss for words a couple times. I'm just really excited to be here doing this. I'm really excited to be a part of the Arcadian Vanguard family, and this is stuff that I just absolutely love so much, and hopefully you guys love it as well too. We're just going to try to grow, and anything that you'd like to hear from us, anything that you'd like to do, any feedback that you have, we would certainly appreciate. Twitter, always open, always available there. We're always going to try to keep a positive Twitter presence at Mid-Atlantic Pod. Over on Facebook as well, too. I got to be honest, Roman, I'm not great with the Facebook. I know you're good with the Facebook, so I know you're going to have to help me out here and do a lot with it, because I know you're out there, and I know a lot of people out there listening are big Facebook fans, and we're going to try to keep up our social media presence as much as we possibly can. And Roman, as we close out this show here, any last thoughts that you have on the show we just watched, and how you feel about this show that we're doing right now going forward?
Oh, well, first of all, I would like to thank the great Brian Last for the kind words and encouragement of, allowing me to do the show. And Mike, I want to thank you for allowing me to go on this journey with you. And, this show, there was not any 5-star matches by any stretch, but anytime you get Piper and Ivan Koloff, I mean, you can't go wrong. And, Slaughter would go on to be a future world champion, and Jake and Wyndham, and it's just going to get better and better. And I can't wait to do the future podcast and see the main angles that are going to go on, and it's just going to get better and better.
I'm epically bad at goodbyes, so I won't extend this one out any further. I will leave it right here, and also thank the great Brian Lass and Lou Kippelman for letting us into their home here at the Arcadian Vanguard, and also want to thank all of you out there for listening. And I don't think I could do it any better than Bob Cottle.
Yes, that'll do it for this week. See you next week, and until then, so long for now.
The Mid-Atlantic Championship Podcast has been a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network.